In the city of echoes, where the sky wore a permanent shroud of black, lived Cale. He was a ghost in his own story, a man carved from worry and want. His frame as gaunt as the skeletal buildings that clawed at the perpetual twilight. This wasn't a city of dreams, it was a graveyard of them, silent and still, rendered in stark black and white, as if color itself had given up and fled. Every street corner held a memory, every shadow a phantom. For Cale, this monochrome world wasn't just his home, it was a mirror to his soul, reflecting a landscape drained of life, of hope, of everything but the crushing weight of what was. He walked. It was the only thing left to do. His feet, wrapped in worn leather, carried him through streets that had forgotten the warmth of the sun. The silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered sound. It was a silence born of absence, a quiet so profound it screamed. Cale's own breath seemed an intrusion, his heartbeat a frantic drum against the unyielding stillness. He moved like a spectre through this forgotten place, his eyes, deep-set and haunted, scanning the familiar desolation. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. There was nothing left to find. He was simply moving, a restless spirit tethered to a dying world. Then, the ash began to fall. It drifted down from the black heavens, not like the gentle dust of a forgotten hearth, but like malevolent snow, each flake a tiny speck of a world on fire. It settled on his shoulders, on his hair, a grey crown for the king of this empty kingdom. The air grew thick with the scent of burning, a bitter perfume that spoke of annihilation, and with the ash came the change. The city, once just dead, was now dying. Distant embers glowed, painting the edges of the monochrome world with a sick, orange light. The silent city was beginning to burn. Cale didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He just kept walking, his pace unchanged, as the world around him began to writhe in its death throes. He wandered into the heart of the inferno, a labyrinth of flame and ruin. Buildings that had stood for centuries now groaned and collapsed, their steel skeletons melting into grotesque sculptures. The ash fell thicker, faster, a blizzard of soot and sorrow. And in the flickering, dancing shadows cast by the flames, figures began to coalesce. They were monstrous, things of nightmare and madness. Their forms were distorted, stretched and twisted into impossible shapes, their limbs too long, their faces a blur of silent agony. They moved through the periphery of his vision, skittering through the alleys, their shadowy bodies contorting in the firelight, but they paid him no mind. These horrors, these denizens of the apocalypse, seemed not to see him. They were part of the destruction, manifestations of the city's final, desperate breath. But Cale was separate. He was a spectator, a forgotten relic in a world being actively unmade. He passed by a creature that seemed to be made of molten shadow and broken glass, its form constantly shifting, yet it offered no threat. He saw another, a towering thing of knotted sinew and burning embers, slump against a wall and dissolve into a pile of glowing dust. They were dying with the city, and he was just ... there. The profound loneliness of his existence was never more apparent. Even the monsters of his own personal hell ignored him. He was utterly, completely, and terrifyingly alone. His journey had no destination, but his feet led him ever upward. He climbed the broken spine of a skyscraper, a stairway to a hellish heaven. Each step was a labor, the air thick and hot, stealing the breath from his lungs. He ascended through floors that were now just skeletal frames, offering terrifying glimpses of the blazing city below. The wind howled through the empty window sockets, a mournful dirge for a world that was already gone. He didn't look down, not yet. His focus was on the summit, on reaching the highest point, as if gaining a new perspective could somehow change the unchangeable. Finally, he reached the top. He stood on the precipice of what was once a grand rooftop garden, now a scorched platform of concrete and twisted metal, and from this vantage point, he looked out and saw it all, the full, horrific, and breathtaking scale of the destruction. The city was a single, sprawling ocean of fire, a sea of liquid flame that stretched to the horizon, consuming everything. The black and white world was gone, replaced by a vibrant, terrible tapestry of orange, red, and yellow. It was an artist's rendition of Armageddon, beautiful in its absolute devastation. Waves of heat rolled over him, but he felt no pain. He only felt a deep, resonant emptiness. It was then that it emerged. From the very heart of the inferno, something rose. It was colossal, a being of pure, unadulterated fire, its form vaguely humanoid, but impossibly vast. Its head brushed the ash-choked clouds. Its arms were rivers of magma that spanned entire districts. It was not a creature of rage or malice. It was an entity of pure consumption, an elemental force of ending. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its every motion causing tsunamis of fire to sweep across the cityscape. As Kale watched this god of flame rise from the ruin, his expression was not one of fear. There was no terror in his eyes, no shock on his face. There was only a profound soul-crushing despair, a final, weary acceptance. This was it, the final act, the last page of the book. He had seen it all before, in his dreams, in the quiet moments of his waking life. This apocalypse was not a surprise. It was an inevitability he had carried within him for years. This fiery giant was not an invader. It was the physical manifestation of the emptiness that had hollowed him out long ago. He was not a victim of this end. He was its silent author. The colossal entity turned its gaze, a gaze of 1,000 suns, across its kingdom of fire. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, it seemed to look directly at Kale, a tiny, insignificant figure against the backdrop of total annihilation. There was no recognition, no acknowledgement. There was only the inevitable, forward march of the entity. The entity raised a hand, made of stellar fire, and a wave of pure energy, of absolute heat and light, surged forward. It moved faster than thought, a tidal wave of oblivion that vaporized everything in its path. It raced towards the skyscraper, towards the lone figure standing at its peak. Kale didn't close his eyes. He didn't turn away. He watched it come. He watched the end of all things approach. The final shot is of his eye, a world of sorrow and resignation. For a fleeting instant, the entire cataclysm, the rising god of flame, the ocean of fire, is reflected perfectly in his pupil, a universe of destruction contained within a single, despairing gaze. Then, the fire hits, and there is nothing left, not even the ash.